Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Artist Emancipation Podcast. I have a fucking treat for you guys today. If you guys look at my social media, if you listen to this podcast, for God's sakes, you have seen this man's artwork, and it is undeniable in its quality, in its experimentation. I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast, Nick Fancher. Welcome to the Artist Emancipation.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. The main thing here is just introduce yourself, let the listeners know who you are and how you got to your position as such a well-known photographer that you are now.
Oh man, how do I condense that into a soundbite? So I'm a photographer that's based in Columbus, Ohio, though I am also frequently in LA, so kind of I list both on my site. I've been photographing things and people since 1997 when I took my first photo class in high school. So it's always, I never know how to answer the question. It's like, do you start the clock then? Do you start it when I graduated from Ohio State with my fine art photo degree in 2005? Do you start it when I launched my LLC in 2007? Do you start it when I finally was able to quit my part-time job and go full-time, which was like 2011? So, I've been shooting for a long time. I've been full-time for a relatively long time, but I've been doing what people know as my work for not as long. Like that would probably be within the last 10 years-ish. But obviously my techniques are constantly evolving and I'm always trying new things. I get bored really easily, and so I don't do the same thing for that long. It always kind of keeps me pushing into new territories, for better or for worse, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's actually one thing I love about you as an artist is that all of your work is so distinct because it's based on your exploration, right? And I think that's something that artists, especially new artists coming into the space that they want to be in, they have trouble with. It's like, I have to find my style and I have to do it in 2 days so people know who I am, right? So
Right.
can you touch on maybe how it started for you, like that playfulness and that experimentation? Because I'm sure it was a process in finding what you truly love to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, there's like two things I want to touch on. The first is that what I refer to as like the fingerprint of the artist, like the style that sort of emerges over time. And I don't think that can be rushed. I think that for the first 10 years, you're trying everything out. You're trying on different techniques that other people have kind of established. And you're like, okay, I like this. I don't like this as much. I really like this. But like, I think that it is a disservice to an artist to try to like lock in, like, this is what I am and this is what I'm not, because that will just always kind of change if you let it just be organic. And I mean, and now I'm at a point where people say I recognize your image, even if it's like a lot of people associate me with like colorful gel photography, but I also do a lot of black and white stuff and like experimental stuff that doesn't have hypercolor. And I have consistently people that can still recognize an image of mine, even if it's not like a super colorful image. And I think that there are a lot of choices that an artist makes that kind of like define that fingerprint of the artist, like whether it's the subjects that you work with, how you direct the subjects, what lens you use, what angle you use, which images from the final selection you choose to post, how you edit them. All of those will kind of determine what the image looks like. And students that take my workshop that shot the same model with the same settings and the same gear at the same moment as me, the images look totally different because they picked a different image, they directed the subject differently, they edited the photos differently. All of that changes the final image, and that's what I'm kind of speaking to. And so I think that, that will just kind of happen over time. Yeah. And the other thing that I had wanted to mention was that my earlier on, like I want to say like 15 years ago, like where I was like, I I was like, because when I graduated from art school, I only had a film photo degree. Like I'd only been doing film, and by then it was 2005, so digital was pretty much taken over, and I didn't have access to a darkroom anymore, so I had to make the switch. But I had to just kind of start from scratch in a lot of ways and learn
Mhm.
how to like use digital, and like I didn't have access to a studio, so shooting in my basement and like trying to just make it work with what I had, just like really cheap gear. And that led me down a very unconventional path. And there was this like growing pains phase where it was like I have images in my head that I want to bring to life, but I don't the physical like skill set to do it. Like all of my efforts come up short. Like this looks sort of similar to what I pictured, but not quite. And so that desire to like really express myself, like I felt like I don't know, like it's like if you start like I climb, and like if I when I first started going to the climbing gym and I would see people doing these like routes that were really impressive, it's like I really want to try that, but I just don't have the physical ability. I don't have the muscles, I don't have the skill. And so that was like this like place of frustration where it's like, okay, I want to keep my eyes on that goal, but I have to just that'll probably take me 5 years to get to that level. And I
Right.
just have to keep my head down and do the day to day. And eventually I'll get there. And that's how it was with me creatively, just like looking at the people that I viewed as the best photographers in the world and keep trying to replicate what they're doing and failing, but improving as I kept at it.
Right, right. And I always tell like the younger people that come into like my design world, I'm like, replication is such a huge part of learning how to do something because they're always like, oh, I don't want to copy people and I don't want to do this. But I'm like, and I'm sure you did the same thing. Like in art school, we have your whole first year is just like master replication, where you go through
Yeah.
everything that the masters did. And it's not like you're selling the artwork. It's not like you're putting it out
Yeah.
as your own, right? Like you're just learning that technique. And like you said, that takes years to sometimes go through.
Yeah. And I say the same to my daughter. She's 12, and she uses my iPad and uses Procreate to draw. She basically traces. She really loves the show Bob's Burgers, and so she'll do a
Perfect.
screen grab on the iPad and then of like a scene she likes, and then she'll just do a trace of it in Procreate, and the final image looks identical. Like you couldn't tell which was the original, which was her drawing. And I was
Yeah.
like, you have refined your skill now that you're like super fast and you can do it. So now the task is moving away from the replication into making your own stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that once you have your skill set kind of dialed in, that's not as hard of a leap to do.
Right. Right. And this is maybe a little off topic, but I love that you have a kid who's also like very creative, it sounds like. So, how do you take like your career and how do you kind of influence, what she gets into and how to push her creatively?
I mean, my son is also, they both go through, he's older, he's 14. They both go through phases of creative like interests. And I try to just like encourage them as it's there and not push them because I don't want to make them like hate it.
Right.
But like my daughter will go through a phase where she's really into writing, and she'll write like these little novellas, and she'll put them in the little neighborhood libraries around, and or my son will go through phases where he's like really into taking photos or really into drawing, but then it's like, oh, okay, I'm not interested in that anymore. Now I just want to play video games. I'm like, okay, but just so you know, like if you ever do want to go back into like photography, for example, like that's a really viable career path. And I have my own business, and so I can start to train you up to be an assistant or a
Yeah.
digital tech, or like a viable career path. And I am able to kind of like train you up like job trade, so you don't have to necessarily go to school for that if that's something you want to pursue. Yeah.
Right, right. And I love that, like, because I don't know how you grew up, but like my family was very not, I don't want to say not supportive of like the whole artist as a career thing, but they weren't thrilled, right? They were like, okay, well, maybe you should, use your brains for something like a doctor or like a nurse and go do something kind of like that, right? And so I always had that in the back of my head that I'm like, I can't be a full-time artist and make good money, but it's like, I'm sitting here, you're sitting here, we've clearly made lives out of this, right? So it's
Yeah.
very inspiring to have those people out there who are supporting the arts and even, doing the same thing for their kids, telling them like, this shit is awesome, right? Like you get to be
Well, it's
you.
that expression representation matters. Like if you don't see an example of someone doing something, you might not realize it's an option, you
Right.
know? And so, I mean, I can see my two high school photography teachers. I went to two different schools where I took photo, and them seeing the potential in my interest. Because I mean, I'm sure the work I was creating was like very basic. I mean, maybe better than the average student because I really put a lot of energy into it. And I was like, I want to be here all day. Can I just take
Right.
photo all day? Like, but they kind of like they saw that and kind of cultivated that in me. And so, and my parents sure as hell didn't. And so it was those people that those high school photo teachers that I mean, I named my cats after them because I'm just like, if they hadn't spoken into my life, I don't know what I would be doing right now. I'd probably be
Right.
working a retail job. Like so many of the people I went to high school photo with and college photo with aren't working with a camera in their hand these days. I mean,
Right.
I'm one of the minority by far. I would say like 10% of the people that were in those classes still work in photo part time or full time.
Yeah. Yeah.
FS.
That's how I feel about art school. Like I see a lot of the people that I graduated with just in completely opposite jobs. And it's disheartening, but it's also kind of like, okay, fuck, we did this. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's talk about like how you got into be your own photographer, right? Like you're doing this on your own. I want to describe to the listeners just like your style of artwork too. Like obviously I'll post it when I launch this, but it's all in camera effects, which I didn't even know was a fucking thing until I met you. Because when I first saw your work, it was with a band called Starset, and it was these really cool, like in motion graphics, it looked like. And I was like, okay, he's really good at Photoshop. So he obviously did that, right? So, how did you kind of experiment to get all these in camera effects going? Because you were the first to kind of bring this to the public eye, I think.
I mean, I definitely wasn't the first. Like, there's been people that have been using like intentional motion blur in their photography for decades. Maybe I was one of the ones to help make it more common, like on social media or something. I wrote 4 books, 3 were print books and 1 was an ebook in the 2010s. That was kind of when social media was really taking power. And I realized at that point that I was working unconventionally, and so when I would share behind the scenes of my setup, people would be like, wait, you made that image and that scene with that gear? Like, you don't need to have a big crew and a big studio and like expensive equipment to do that. And I didn't realize I was doing something that was that weird. I was just if anything, I was kind of embarrassed by it. Like, oh man, like this is sort of like embarrassing. I have to bring these like employees that need headshots down to the basement of my house where it smells like litter box and mildew. And the ceiling is so low they have to sit on a workout bench so that their head doesn't touch the ceiling. So, I mean, that's what I worked out for years, and until I was finally like, you know what, fuck it, like I need to get a studio, even if it's like it's risky to pay this monthly fee and sign a lease and whatever, but I guess I just have to go for it. So all that to say is like it was just like this kind of like I don't have any other options. By then I had 2 little kids. I had an example of what I didn't want to do, and my dad, he was this like drove the public transit city bus for like 3 decades, and it just kind of like broke him, like
Right.
physically. He was already a broken man emotionally,
Right.
but
Right.
that just made him all the more meaner. And I was like, okay, so I know what I don't want to become, and I know I've worked retail since I was like, I don't even know how young. I mean, I've been working jobs since I was like 11, works full time all through college. I just know that hustle mentality. I had a paper out for 5 years, so I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning every day, 365 for 5 years. So just like that, I already had this like muscle of like, this is not that bad relative to the other things I've experienced. And like, if I have to just keep grinding and whatever, I can do this for forever. Whenever I got the whiff of like traction, like whether it was in a technique or an industry, like, okay, I think that I could do more with music. I think people in the music industry like my stuff, or I think I can do more with color photography, color lighting, because people really respond to that. Like once I caught a whiff of like, this is working, then it was like, okay, now I'm going to hit this from like all the angles. And also developing my techniques also really helped that I started teaching workshops, because students would ask me questions like, why do you do it like this? Or could you do it like that? Or what happens if you do it like this? And I would be like, I always did it like this. Let's see what happens if we do it like what you said. Or, you know what I mean? Like, I learned so much, and I know that's sort of like a cliche at this point, like teachers learn as much or more than their students.
Right.
But it's true. Like, I found it to be true. And so, if I've just been doing one technique one way, but then all of a sudden it occurs to me, either it was an epiphany or a student suggested it or whatever, or I just had a random neuron connection in my brain.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wait, if I did it like this, then what happens if I change this one small element? Then what will happen? And that kind of has led to the way I work now, where it's like, even this last year, for example, I've been doing a lot of in-camera multiple exposures. The camera I use allows me to like take a photo, then select that photo from the memory card, and then it overlays it on my viewfinder. And then I can take another portrait and it merges them. And I've been doing multiple exposures for years, but as my camera technology has improved, it's made it easier for me to do it intentionally. Before it was more guesswork. But like in the past year, I've been doing a lot of those and working a lot with fluids like food coloring in water, or paint in water, or different kind of things that are always moving and changing. And then I add other elements where my lights are changing colors. So there's these elements of chaos that I can't control, but I introduce, and I know what will happen with certain lighting that I do. Like if I leave this part in shadow, but then as the light changes, it'll fill in the shadow area. Like I know how and when to let the chaos in. And that puts me in the same position as my client or my subject, because I'm as surprised as they are when the image pops up on the back of the screen. I'm just like, oh, whoa, like look how that blends there, and like who would have thought that? And especially like I work with dancers a lot of the time for the last 15 years, because I'm like, if I'm working on a new idea, all my mental energy is going into trying to figure out what's happening on my camera. So I have nothing left for directing the subject. Right. So dancers already know how to move, and like everything they do looks awesome anyway. So I'm just like, okay, can you just kind of like stay right there and then just like move in place? And I'm just going to be like staring at my camera silently for like a half hour.
Yes.
But that's kind of how I wrap my mind around a technique. And once I do it for like 3 to 6 shoots, then I'm like, okay, I can replicate it, I understand it, and now I can baby step into like the weeds a bit more.
Right.
And so
And
just been doing that long enough that's how I got to where I'm at.
Dude, that's so cool. I love that you said it's like chaos, and then you just like you learn to control it a little bit. So that's a really cool way to look at any type of art, I think. But a lot of people that listen to this podcast are just starting out in their artistic careers, and they're working with clients. And the last shoot that we had, we talked a little bit about, like you deal with a lot of like famous people and a lot of people who have very clear vision. So what are some of the things you've learned working with these higher tier clients as a photographer, as an artist, that you could pass on to other people looking to do the same? Just like tips of advice when working with people.
Well, I mean, there's several things to say about that. The first is that like I get a lot of people that'll email me or comment or message me or whatever, and just like, how did you get that big client, or how do I get a client like that? I don't even respond at this point because I just get so many of them, and it's like there's not a short answer for that anyway.
Right.
But like the condensed answer for me was like, you need to have images in your portfolio that look like stuff that other people would want, like examples of what you could do for them. So if you want to shoot music, you want to shoot bands, you need to shoot bands and have them in your portfolio, right? So if you so for me, what I did was like reach out to Columbus bands. This was like 15 years ago, and it's like, hey, can I just like, would you want to get together and do a shoot for like an hour? I'm going to do it my way, but then you get the images to use for your portfolio as long as you credit me,
Right.
So it's a quote unquote free shoot, but I'm doing it for an end goal of like, I want to have the stylized portrait that I can put in my portfolio that's somewhat recognizable. It's like at least Columbus people know this band, and then I'm forging a connection with the record labels or other bands that are friends with them and see those photos that might want to hire me, and just start rolling it uphill. And like, so if bigger bands come through town on tour, Columbus gets a lot of bands that come through, if they're touring the country, that come through Columbus or Cleveland or Detroit, somewhere within a few hour drive. So I started reaching out to the tour manager or any sort of connection point I could try messaging their band page on socials, or contacting individual band members, whatever, linking back to that portfolio of the other Columbus bands I shot, and just like, hey, let me shoot you at the venue. 15 minutes is all I need. We could do it after sound check because they're just hanging out between sound check and then when the music starts. So I'll just shoot 15 minutes and then you get images, blah, blah, blah. So I started doing that and getting bigger bands, still not that big, but medium-sized bands. Then it was like more recognizable, and then like photo editors started to see those. Hey, can we use that photo you did of the Melvins for a magazine? Oh, sure, yeah. Could you also shoot bands like for us? Okay, yeah, amazing. And so, I mean, that just took years of just putting in the work and keeping my head down. You know what I mean? And so I didn't get my first like higher profile like person, I guess. What I say is like, I think it was Tame Impala was the first one that I was like, I was really intimidated. I was like, this is a big deal. And this was 2015. So I had been 10 years from college. I graduated from college 10 years ago. I had been several years full-time freelance, and I got an opportunity to shoot Tame Impala. And even then, I was so intimidated, I only shot about 30 frames.
Yeah.
And I went in with like one idea. I did the idea. They were all standing there just like kind of silent. And I was like in my head, just like, oh my God, they hate you. They hate this. They don't want to be here. You're failing. Like, get out of here before anything else happens and you fuck things up more. And so I'll still every now and then go back to that shoot and I'm like, maybe there was another image I took that I just didn't notice on the first edit or the 10th edit that I could find. I'm like, no, I took like 30 shots and they were all the same. And then I was like, okay, thanks, bye, and left. And so it wasn't until like I assisted whenever a photographer that was in town from like New York or LA, and they would reach out to local photographers like for crew recommendations, like, hey, you're a fellow photographer, can you recommend an assistant I need for a shoot? And if I was available, I'd be like, I'll do it, I'll assist, because I want to see how you run a shoot.
Right.
And I remember I was assisting this photographer who was shooting like all these golf PGA pros, like Jack Nicklaus, not Nicholson, Jack Nicklaus, and all these golf people that had handlers and agents and whatever. And they're like, okay, you only get 5 minutes with this person. And the guy was like taking photos and like, okay, time. But the subject, like the golfers were still looking at the camera. So he just kept shooting, and the management or whatever, like, we're done. And he just kept shooting, and it was ignoring them. Like, one more over here. Okay, turn here. Great. And it wasn't until they pulled the celebrity out of the that like the shot. And I was like, oh, it kind of gave me permission in that moment to be like, I'm not doing this for the handlers or the agents or whatever. I'm doing it for the person. But the higher level you get with like celebrity, you are going to have these middle management people in there that are trying to protect their client or whatever. But they're just all often just getting in the way and kind of ruining the moment, because all that matters is you get a shot that they all love.
Right.
And so after that, like I was like, okay, I can take up more space, and they're actually just the same as I am. So I can make this however I want. If I'm awkward, I'm going to make it awkward. If I'm normal, I'm going to make it normal. And so this last big shoot I had from like a month or two ago with Slipknot, and like Slipknot, there's like 9 members. They all wear the masks. Like you don't know who they are. Like they're intimidating, scary masks, whatever. And it was a last minute shoot.
Yeah.
Like I had like no, it wasn't until an hour before the shoot that I even got photos of where I'd be shooting. And it was like this indoor place. I was like, okay, fine. But I have to shoot one of the guys wasn't at the shoot. He would have to be shot later and composited. I knew I would have to shoot 8 people in a room with an 8-foot ceiling, and they would all have to be a vertical format. So I was like, how am I going to do that? Blah blah blah. But I was like, I'm just gonna not worry about it until I get there, and we'll figure it out. So what ended up happening is I just pulled a couch over and had 3 members stand on the couch, 3 stand in front of it, and 2 kneel down on the ground. But as each person came in, I was teaching a workshop at the same time. So I was like, hey, who wants to go help me? I have to shoot Slipknot. Do you guys want to help me out and, assist or whatever and see how it goes? And they're like, yeah. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah, everybody raising their hand down.
Yeah. And so the students came and they were like, all like, just like, oh my God, this is crazy. I've never done anything like this. And like, as each member of Slipknot came in one at a time, I had to shoot individuals of every member, and then I'd shoot a group shot. And I had a half hour to do all of this. And on top of that, I was like, you know what? I want to do 4 different color scenarios and do every shot with and without a prism. So I'm basically doing like, what is that? 15 unique shots, unique setup shots, in a half hour. But I was like, each member came in, it took about 30 seconds. So I was like, okay, stand there. But the time it took for one to walk out and another to walk in, we had swapped the gels out. So It was just like real easy. I just kept it chill. Each time they came out, I was like, hey, what's up? Howdy. How's it going? Like, and they're all just like, all metal and just like, yeah. I'm like, how's it going? How's your day? Yeah. And like, it was just like real chill. And then it was funny. They would kind of warm up after that. And they're like, oh man, I never thought about using a prism before. I got to get a prism. I'm a photographer too. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like sipping chamomile tea through a mask, and like, they're just normal people. And
Right.
and so like I just learned to just treat, and I had the same thing last year. I shot Jason Segel, the actor, the LA Times, and we just talked about our favorite places to go hiking, and like about existential dread in line at the grocery store, and like just life, and like we all experience the same shit. We're all human. And
Right.
so he was like, I'm just so relieved you're just like normal and we're just talking, instead of most people like, be funny, move around, jump, loud, make me laugh, And I find that to be so cringe when like a photographer, a director, just because I've taught workshops too where like some of the students, like when it's their turn to work with the model, like, okay, act like this is the best day of your life, and like you are this thing, and like they just like give this whole like thing, and I'm just like, all you're doing is like making it about you. Like,
Right.
just like chill out and notice what their vibe is. Are they chill? Are they animated? Just kind of match their energy and guide them.
Yeah. No, that's incredible, because it's like art in a big sense of things is basically just like emotion reading, right? So like the more that we can pick up on what they're putting out, like the smoother it's going to go, which I think is like the epitome of advice when working with clients is like match vibes, baby, match vibes, because it would be so much easier. And then we are almost out of time. We are out of time, but I just want to give you a space to, is there any big projects coming up? Where can people find you at? And anything like your classes that you're teaching, do you have any coming up?
Yeah. So I have a workshop next month in August in Columbus at my studio. There's still a couple spots left. It's a 2-day workshop, and I just kind of, each of my workshops are different. Like I'm usually teaching the most recent stuff I've been into, you know what I mean? Because there's more that I could teach then I could fit into 2 days. So it's always just like, what do you guys want to do? We can do this or that. And so it's been kind of a fun thing just to slowly tweak the workshop over the last 15 years. And now I feel like it's in a sweet spot. And so I have people take it more than once because they're like, oh, I took it like 5 years ago, but like, I want to see the new stuff that you've been doing, you know? So that's coming up in August. For people that can't take the workshop, I have like some online tutorials that are on my website. There are links that teach a lot of the techniques I do. But otherwise, yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's just at Nick Fancher. And I post a couple times a week on there. Just my latest work stuff.
Yeah. And his work is incredible, guys. Like my description of it can't do it justice. So make sure you check out his Instagram, make sure you check out his website. And Nick, it was such a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and just sharing a little bit more about you. I look forward to working more with you in the future, and I'm sure you'll be back on in no time. So
yeah, cool. Well, thanks again for having me. I always like talking about this stuff.
Me too. All right. That is it. And we will see you next week, guys, with a new episode of the Artist Emancipation.